Hey everybody, it's Trevor here with the channel where every day is range day. And in today's video we're going to be doing a full review of the wedge pack from Tier 1 Concealed. About a year ago we did a sizing guide for these nifty little foam wedges that you can put on the back of your holsters to give you a little bit more comfort and concealment. And now that we've had them for just about a year, I decided it was time to do a full review on how they've held up and lasted over the course of a year. Let's check it out. Alright, so to get started, we're going to do just kind of an overview of the Tier 1 Concealed foam wedges, what they are, what they're for, a bit about how I have mine used, and just a quick overview about sizing them and the fitment in general. From there, I'll just go into a pretty brief review of the product. It is fairly simple and there's not too much to touch on, but then we'll go into my thoughts about a full review for this product over the year, and then I'll hit on some more pertinent questions that popped up in the comments of our last video, things I'd like to address about their durability in different conditions throughout the year, and how the wedges have held up. And of course, we're clear. Now in my case, I have these foam wedges on my Tier 1 Concealed Axis Elite Appendix holster. Mine is sized for a Glock 19 with the +5 mag extension that you can see here. Now in general, these wedges are basically just a foam wedge that would adhere to the back of your holster and help give you a little bit of comfort and concealment by sort of pushing the grip more into your body. This helps with a little bit more comfort so you don't have as much kydex digging into you down here, and it also helps kind of nudge the grip and the top of the gun and the magazine, things like that, back into yourself to avoid any printing issues that may pop up. A good holster will help with this in general, but the wedges do kind of kick it up a notch in terms of comfort and concealability. That's the main purpose that I got these wedges for, just to kind of try them out and see what they did in terms of comfort and concealment, and I gotta say, it has performed wonderfully on both fronts. The wedges help tuck the gun even more into your waistline, so to speak, and it is a lot more comfortable having this nice little foam piece poking into you rather than the hard rigid kydex. This isn't a light bearing holster, but I imagine that effect would be even more amplified as opposed to having like a Surefire or something poking into you. Now in terms of my actual full review from them, I mean, I've loved them and I definitely buy them again for any future holsters that I end up getting. I don't have any complaints from a durability standpoint. The wedges are pretty simple in their construction, as you can see here, so there's not too much that can go wrong. It's basically just a little foam piece that makes up the wedge, some adhesive backing that is pressure sensitive that you stick onto your holster, and then a little vinyl stripping piece here that helps the wedge to avoid catching on your clothes or something like that when you're taking the holster on and off every day. Now touching on those brief characteristics of the wedge, that's kind of what you look to see how it's performed in terms of durability and comfort throughout a year. The vinyl stripping on the back has shown basically no wear. It's not torn or scuffed or ripped at all throughout the year that I've had it, putting the holster on and off every single day, probably taking this holster on and off hundreds of times throughout the course of a year. And the vinyl looks fine, and it looks straight, and it doesn't catch on any of your clothing when you take the holster on and off. Moving on from there, the next bit to kind of look at is the adhesive. Again, it's just pressure sensitive. You just push the wedge back onto the back side of your holster there, and it's what sticks and holds the wedge in place. Again, after a year of having it, this is the only wedge I've had on here. It's not peeling up at all. All the corners look pretty good in general. And I mean, I could pull the wedge off maybe if I tried super hard, but the adhesive's still holding strong and fast all throughout a year of wearing this holster. And up next, the only thing to talk about is really just the foam itself. Now it is pretty firm, but it does give. Now these two characteristics are essential to the product, and how they sort of relate is important to its performance. The flexibility or give of the foam is important for comfort. If this was, firm as a rock, you basically might as well make it out of kydex. It would definitely do its concealment job very well, but it would not be very comfortable. Now the give of the foam, if it gives more, it's definitely a lot more comfortable, but at some point, if it's too squishy, so to say, it would just flatten up as soon as you put it on your belt. Then it's not really doing anything in terms of concealment, so why bother? A good medium for this is pretty important for the product, and I think Tier 1 Concealed's done a pretty good job at picking the right foam for this product. In terms of the foam, it has compressed a little bit. As you can see here, this is the medium wedge, which started off at about 3/4 inches tall for the thick part of the wedge there. Measuring this real quick, looks like we're sitting right at about a 1/2 inch or so, which kind of brings it down to what the small size is undeformed. Now that being said, I would recommend in our sizing guide, again, to find the distance at which you want the holster to be adjusted, and then whatever size that is, say it measures it, you want to do 3/4 inch, that would equal a medium wedge. That being said, after a couple months or so, it will deform that 1/4 inch or so, depending on probably your belt and your body type. I would probably suggest going up a size. For me, that would be the large wedge here. I haven't really bothered to switch it on this one just because, I kind of like how it's molded in my body, and it's actually pretty comfortable and conceals well how it is. Again, that's something that's kind of flexible and will depend on your own personal preferences in terms of comfort and your concealment needs. But that being said, from the foam perspective, it will deform after a couple weeks, and from at least my own experiences wearing it just about every day for a year, about a 1/4 inch of deformation on the medium is what I experienced. Your mileage might vary, but if you're worried about the deformation affecting your concealment abilities, just go up a size and you should be just fine. But overall, I've really enjoyed the wedge as a product, and I found it to be a cheap and very effective way of gaining a little bump in comfort, and maybe more than a little bit of a bump in concealment for your firearms. I'd imagine this effect would be even more amplified if you carried something full size like a Glock 17 or HK VP9, some of the larger full-sized handguns. This effect will only be more pronounced, and for 15 bucks for the pack, or I think they're $5 just for the individuals. You can't go wrong. I'm definitely gonna put them on the rest of my holsters going forward, and I've absolutely loved having it on my Glock 19 Tier 1 concealed holster as well. Now moving on from my general thoughts and experiences, I thought I'd touch on a couple questions that we had from some viewers about more specific elements of the wedge packs and how they performed. Aside from overall longevity, one person asked how long do they last, just in general. And like I said, I've had these for about a year and it is still in tip-top shape. The deformation does take place after about a month or so, maybe a couple weeks, depending on your belt, how tight you wear it and stuff. And again, I've had about a 1/4 inch of deformation on the medium wedge on the Glock 19 holster that I've been wearing. Another question that's something to consider with these wedges was, it's essentially when you're wearing this holster, and you put the wedge on there, it is compressing the grip a lot more into your body. Too much, and that might interfere with your ability to get a good master grip on your firearm for when you go for a draw. That being said, with the medium wedge that I sized up for, I didn't really have that kind of issue. My sort of natural posture and stance would almost have the gun kind of leaning forward a little bit when it's on my belt, as opposed to kind of leaning back some. So the medium actually kind of pushed it right into the sweet spot I wanted, and that's just something to consider with your sizing. If your posture and body type already have the gun kind of leaning towards you, a wedge might not even be necessary, or maybe just use like the small one if you just want a little bit of padding instead of some kydex pushing into you. That being said, it is a very important quality of the wedges and your overall carry rig here to consider. You can have all the comfort and concealment in the world, but if it actually interferes with your grip when you go to draw, you're probably better off without the wedge. Again, the mediums work fine for me, but that's definitely something to consider before you end up committing to one of these long term. Just think twice about your sizing and practice with it a couple times before you actually start carrying it day to day and depending on it. Another big question that we've got about these wedges is how do they hold up over time when exposed to heat or sweat if you're working outside all day doing manual labor in the summertime, things like that. Does it affect the adhesive at all? Does it just soak into the wedge and get all nasty after a little bit? And at least in my experiences, the answer is no. Heat hasn't significantly affected the wedge I have here, and it hasn't absorbed at least too much sweat and gotten super kind of nasty after the couple months. Again, I carried it out throughout the summer here in North Carolina, ridiculously hot and humid, and I just haven't noticed any adverse side effects. Now this could vary from person to person based on how much manual labor you do outside. You know, if you're working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and you sweat a lot more than I do, that could be a different story. But again, I have worn this throughout the course of a year in the hot and the cold, and basically all I do after a longer day outside in the heat is take the holster off and just give it a good wipe down, which is probably a good idea anyways. And it seemed to be good to go. The wedge isn't overly dirty, the adhesive has still maintained its integrity throughout the year, and unless you're in some super extreme environments and you're just not wiping your holster off after every day, I wouldn't see heat being an issue at all to affect the foam itself or the adhesive. Another question that popped up is whether you should go for the standard width wedges, which is what I have here and on my holster, or the wide width wedges that Tier 1 Concealed has since added to their website. Now these weren't available when I purchased my holster in these wedge packs about a year ago. The standard width was all you could get, and it was $15 for the size pack. The wide size wedges are $17.50 or something like that, and I'm definitely interested in them. Some people ask if they have concerns about fitment on the holster or just if there's enough room. I know some people like to put them on their mag as well, and it gets a little skinny there. The normal size wedges are probably about all you could fit. You might be able to fit them on there based on your own holster, but at least in my opinion, I would probably go for the wide wedges versus the standard if they had been available when I first ordered these. Now right off the bat, I think the thing to consider is how big of a firearm are you carrying. If you're carrying a subcompact weapon like a P365 or a Springfield Hellcat, or just something smaller, you might not have enough real estate on the back of the holster for the smaller gun to fit the wider wedge. The standards would probably be all you need in that scenario, and that's probably what I would go with. Now for your compacts or full-size Glock 19s up to Glock 17s, for example, the larger ones, I'd probably go for it. You'll definitely have enough room to fit on the holster here. You can see on there's probably about 1.5 inches or so. That covers really the slide and frame portion of the barrel towards the bottom of the holster, and that's where the wedge would occupy. The added bonus of the wider wedge is that you have more surface area to sort of distribute the pressure of the gun against your body. More surface area equals less pressure and ultimately more comfort. The concealment factor shouldn't be affected as long as the wedge is properly sized for you. Another note to consider there is if you have a light bearing holster or not. That gives you even more room on the bottom of the holster to attach a wedge. And if I had a light compatible holster, I would definitely opt for the wide wedges. One, you have the room for it and it's more comfortable. And two, you just have them. You might as well use the space to keep that light from poking into you as much as you can. And that's going to about do it for the review on the Tier 1 concealed foam wedges over the long term, over the course of a year for me, and some answers to some questions that viewers had asked in our previous video about more specific shape retainment, resistance to heat, overall longevity, things like that. If you have any other questions about the Tier 1 concealed foam wedge packs, different applications, stuff you might like to use, feel free to share them down below in the comments and we'll check it out. And if you liked the video, feel free to leave a like down below. And as always, make sure to subscribe to the channel, where every day is range day. Thank you for watching.